Hello everybody, and welcome to my first Kerbal Space Program video since 1.0 released. Now, there's a lot of stuff that was added to this game, and many of you know that this game has been in development for several years. However, this is now the released version of the game. It's not the final version of the game. Many of you also know that the game is going to constantly be getting updates. In fact, we're on currently 1.0.2, so 2 hotfixes has come out since Monday when they released the game, and it is currently Friday. So they're working on updates still. But they also have updates planned for the future, such as a multiplayer update, which I can't wait to get my hands on, because that will be amazing. Like trying to create a floating aircraft to land other aircraft on while other people fly those aircraft. It's going to be cool. But this one right now, if you were waiting to get Kerbal Space Program, is the one that you want. This version of the game feels complete. It's got so much to it. They redid aerodynamics. They added re-entry heat. They've added several new features such as resources, where you would, get drills and drill out resources, say on the moon, and then convert those resources into fuel, which allows you to get back from the moon. So you don't necessarily always have to send rescue missions to all of your missions that fail, because they could just get more fuel for them. Unless it blows up, then you definitely need a memorial mission. There's also several other things like female Kerbals and tons of new parts. Plus, generally speaking, all of the aerodynamics have changed and are just much better. So, because of that, this is going to be a 2-part series. It's just going to be, this first one, checking out all the new parts and stuff, and then I'm going to head over to a career mode game where we're going to take a look at what I've managed to do within like 40 to 50 hours of playing 1.0 so far, including some of the things that I haven't been able to do since because of the changes on specific parts. So this is going to be stupid exciting. Also, they've added just like a lot of convenient stuff, like the most important button in the game, warp to next morning. Trust me, it's super important. They've redone the tech tree and other stuff. But let's take a look at some new parts. Let's start with the vehicle assembly bay, because this right here, this is like the epitome of 1.0. Because they have new aerodynamics and new re-entry heat, they've added this service bay. And this just speaks wonders to the entire thing. So it's this little service bay where you put all of your little space stuff, all your little experiments. I've got 3 thermometers in there, which you don't need. You honestly can only just, you could just use one of these, right? And you could just use like one of those, and let's go over to science, and maybe one of those, and throw in, I don't know, maybe one of these. No, that's slightly too big, but you know what I'm saying. Like it holds all your little parts. In fact, you could put in batteries, right? Batteries are a good example. They are parts that generally stick on the outside of your rocket and look fairly ugly while they do so. Let's set that to 4, so it's, slightly symmetrical. And then the bay doors close and everything's contained within. And this is really nice, because let's say you put in, a Science Junior. By the way, there is another larger service bay, which is this one. So kind of for your larger rockets, but it's mainly, the purpose is the same. I just want to show you this, right? So you have your science stuff, but suddenly you're re-entering the atmosphere. Things are gonna explode if you don't have heat shields. And then that's another new thing that they've added. In fact, they have 3 new heat shields. So there's this one, which is, the size of all the stuff that I need it to be at the moment. Then there's a really large one for hilarity. And then there's a not so large one, kind of the size of the other service bay, which is nice. And these actually have their own resource tied to it. We'll check that out when we do a re-entry here shortly, but it does have a resource tied to it, which means that as you're re-entering and you're burning off parts of the heat shield, it's using up some of that resource, so you kind of know how much life is left on your heat shield, especially if you're doing multiple re-entries with a single craft. Super important to keep that in mind. But let's actually just, with new parts, create a new rocket to fly in the new aerodynamics, right? So we have this is, fairly basic. Most people have done something similar, minus the cool service bay there, and obviously the heat shield. But if we went down and we started adding engines to this thing, there are, you know, a few little new parts. Firstly, when you add a decoupler to the heat shield, it does cover it up, so it gives it a nice little vanity panel, as you might say. And I like that hovering over these parts, it's really subtle, but being able to see through it is very, very cool. It's something that we'll see when we touch the fairings. So let's just add a, you know, like a basic rocket here. Let's do this, because I mean this is a pretty light stage. We don't need anything heavy lifting here, especially to test out the new aerodynamics. But we do, you know, we want something that's big enough to be able to show them off. Let's put on another decoupler, and then possibly. Yeah, we're going to do it right now. We're going to add... Oh, no, I'm going to add it back over here. I think that would be better. So right above the fuel stage there, I'm going to add the new fairings. Now, these are really cool because they are procedural in the fact that you draw them out, and you'll see what I mean. So you put down the base for the fairing, and then you kind of like extend and go upwards, and you kind of figure out what size do I need to cover my... you know, little science rocket is what we're going to call it. So you know, you build it up, and we'll make that symmetrical, and then that'll kind of come in, and then we'll get the tip going, and boom, we have a fairing. And the coolest part is this: when you scroll over it, it pulls itself apart, and you're able to see what's underneath it. I really like that. That's a nice little subtle touch. Right, so we have that. Now we have our first, or our, what will end up being our second stage, but I want to build like a, you know, slightly larger rocket on the bottom here, just so we can kind of test things out. It probably won't need to be fairly big, but we'll add a little bit of mass to it so we can test out some of the new aerodynamics. That should work. I mean, this is a lot more power than we need to get this thing into orbit, but we just have our first basic stage here. New tail fins. We'll take a look at some of the aerodynamic parts in a bit. But we have our first stage, decoupler, you know, second stage, where we want to break this apart a little bit. And then we pop the fairings, and then we pop the decoupler, and then that will come back in, obviously. Now, the thing that I like most about this whole system is it allows you to, and I did this on purpose, it allows you to see, you know, like, oh, I am missing things here, right? Like, most of you people who have played Kerbal will know that I'm missing a parachute, and I'm missing a way of transmitting science, and I'm missing a lot of stuff that would be really important to have. In fact, all of that is said down here in this new engineer's report. So it says parachute missing, hatch obstructed. Well, that's because there's a fairing around it. Stupid, come on. Electrical charge stored but not generated. We don't have any solar panels. That might be embarrassing if we were going for a long mission, right? So it gives you all this information that I really like. In fact, it also tells us that we have unused monopropellant, so we could just take that out, which will reduce our weight, but whatever. So now that I've done that, let's add some parachutes, which probably won't need many, if any at all, because there's a funny way of being able to slow yourself down with the new air brakes, but we'll get to that. Okay, much better. I put the parachutes on. In fact, I put some new radial drogue parachutes on. We'll show you that stuff. I put some struts on just to make sure it doesn't wobble funnily. And yeah, we're all set up. We're good to go. Now, getting this into space, and even before getting into space, was typically the hard part. But now, with the re-entry heat and whatnot, you know, re-entry is kind of the hard part. We'll show that off a bit. So let's launch. As you see, we have not Jebediah, but Valentina, who really loves rockets, as you can tell. Throughout this entire thing, she will look like she's just having a blast. And Valentina is purely amazing. Having female Kerbals, I never thought would be as cool as it is, but it definitely is. So first thing here, you're starting to see a little bit of the effects that you may have seen before. The wobble, right? When you start to get to certain speeds within the atmosphere, you get typically a bit of a wobble. However, there are some new aerodynamic effects as I throttle up on purpose here, and we begin to do a really terrible gravity turn. Not efficient at all, but it's more or less for you know, demonstration purposes. Because as we get faster and faster through the atmosphere, you see we're still within the atmosphere, you'll start seeing things are heating up. And that's really, really bad. You don't want things to burn up. So let's get back up a little bit here. Now, fairings in general are pretty good at removing the amount of heat that you would normally get on a cockpit, which is why we have the fairing there. Plus, it helps aerodynamically. All right, let's move into our next stage. Boom, which we should be stupidly high up, right? Which, did on purpose. That's completely intentional, because I do want to show more of a ballistic re-entry, because honestly, when you come in really, really fast, even with a heat shield, things can get a bit dangerous. Now, while I don't have a lot of mods installed, in fact, I only have the robotics stuff that I've used in Project Destiny before, and then this new Kerbal positioning system mod that I've never seen before, but is incredible for playing through career mode, because you can, you could see like landed at moon, main crater or whatever, stuff like that, or pole, and you'll be able to see where you're at, which is just nice for doing science recovery missions and all that fun stuff. So let's create a little bit of an orbit. One thing you'll notice with the new aerodynamics is you'll pick up a lot more speed. I know I kind of mentioned that before, but you'll pick up a lot more speed, and because of that, you'll tend to be able to get into orbit with some larger crafts that may have not been able to do that before, just because things like pierce the atmosphere a little bit better. I would say it's not incredibly, it's not a huge difference compared to before, but it is a big enough difference that you'll notice some things that, as long as they are aerodynamically sound, they will definitely get into orbit a lot better than they did previously. Should we try landing in the water? Look, it doesn't matter. This stage is dead to us. But first, the most important part of all, aside from my quick save, is blasting this off. Boom! It just flies out, and that's all non-persistent debris, by the way. That will fly away, and then it won't exist anymore. It doesn't sit around, so you don't have to clean up the atmosphere. And then let's just switch stages here. Of course, let's get science, because that's what we do. And because we're, still within space, I am going to send Valentina on a bit of a spacewalk, even though we're coming back into the atmosphere here shortly. This is all, stuff that you normally would do. I'm just showing it off because of the fact that we haven't had the service bay before. So if we send Valentina out, and in fact, we notice that there's a new board button instead of, F, which was also your grab on button. We could do our typical EVA report. Is that our tank? Yeah, it's just floating right. Wow, look at the moon over there. Nice. But you'll see Valentina is so excited. No, I just point this way. No, not that way. Is so excited about everything. Look at her. She's really, really happy. And it's really funny because you'll have her next to like Jebediah and Bob, people that we are used to seeing in Kerbal Space Program, and suddenly she looks like she's having way more fun than them, which I think is hilarious. All right, re-entry begins. Now, the fact that this is open doesn't change anything. Just thought I'd mention that because I've seen a few concerns that, if things are open, does it change the aerodynamics of it coming back in? No, the part is still typically rendered as a circle, so the fact that these doors are open aren't going to make it any worse. So we want to get within the atmosphere, or within coming back in the atmosphere. We're pretty close to that. And we're going to see some of the new parachute stuff. Parachutes can catch on fire, by the way, so you can't just like before in some of my older Kerbal videos, not even Project Destiny, I would release the parachutes way early. That can't be done anymore. They'll catch on fire, and you don't want that happening because, typically if you had backups, they probably would burn up too, because I don't know if you'd be able to slow it down good enough. Anyways, we're going to see the new resource. So a blader is the resource. It actually even shows up over here, right? So you see 200 of 200. That will start going down as we start heating up here. And we can tell Valentina just to point retrograde, and she'll do a good job of keeping this coming back in. In fact, I think F11 shows temperature overlays, but I'm not seeing it. That was something that was added in today's patch, and I I'm not really noticing it. Maybe that's because things aren't overheating. But you will see that this is going down as far as resource is concerned. Now we're getting pretty heavy into the atmosphere here. So one thing that we can do is we have these new radial drogue chutes, which you pop those out and instantly destroyed. They're supposed to slow you down, but that was also changed in today's patch, and I haven't been able to test that out. So make sure that when you launch those, you don't launch them when I did, because they instantly got destroyed. But it was a good demonstration. Let's actually pull our normal chute now. It's good to have backups, and we'll put this back on stability assist. As hilarious as that is, that they just burnt up, the idea behind it is that they slow you down before you before you actually start slowing down with your main parachute, for several reasons. Main one being that it reduces the amount of G-force that your craft has on it at any given time when your main chutes pull, so they don't just rip your craft apart. Although that doesn't happen too much anymore, as we'll go forward here. Now, at about 500 meters before, you got the effect where this would open up, and it would suddenly open up, and your craft would go like launching all over the place. But it doesn't do that anymore. It just kind of like gently, look at that, just gently opens up. But you got to be careful, because if you pull your chutes too late, it may not be able to slow you down enough. However, you see that we just witnessed some of the new aerodynamic stuff, some of the re-entry stuff. That just exploded. It would have been nice to have our other 2 parachutes, which is what I planned for, but at least the rest of our science is safe, right? Now let's take a look at some new aerodynamic parts in the hangar. So the first thing that you'll notice is there's a new cockpit. It's just a inline cockpit. It's kind of more for making, kind of like fighter jet type styles of stuff. But there are a lot of new aerodynamic parts that we're going to take a look at, and the first thing I'm going to do is just build a kind of a shuttle thing, not anything in particular. Just I'm going to put a body on it so we can take a look at some parts. There's a lot of new wings. There's like new canards, as you see there. They're quite cool, in fact. There's new air brakes, right? So when you deploy them, they do this kind of thing. And people have been making aircraft on Reddit and whatnot, that instead of using control flaps on their aircraft like a normal aircraft would, they've been using air brakes to control their craft by like air braking on the left wing in order to slow down that so it turns left. It's really clever and really cool, and I like that people are coming up with this kind of stuff. But there's like new fins, which they're cool. I mean, it's called a basic fin for a reason. But you have these new delta wings, which are really important, which is why I kind of made more of a shuttle-y thing. So you can see that we have more or less just general shuttle wings. I've noticed that, you can even put fuel in the wings. How cool. I didn't notice that before. That's something you could do with B9, but I never noticed it with this new stuff. Now, the bottom doesn't have heat shielding, and I was always concerned when using this stuff since 1.0 that it wouldn't be necessarily shielded, and I know that modders have been making wings that are heat shielded, and modders that have been making wings before that didn't have heat shielding are definitely having them now. So I don't know if these new parts have it. Just a caveat emptor, right? But there's other new stuff that you necessarily wouldn't use on a shuttle for re-entry out of space. You got this new tail. It's more for like a like if you're making a 747. In fact, there's wings for that too, right? So your typical aircraft wing, pretty cool. There's all these new control surfaces. This one's obviously fairly large, but will work. You have your standard control surfaces before. New little like strakes. I like those, and that's very pretty. I like that. Look at that. There's this new tail for space planes. This is what they call it. Is it the space plane tail? Yeah. Let's be honest. It's a shuttle tail, which probably means that it's a little better at its job, and it probably has some heat shielding on it. You could tell this just by, a little bit of the structure on this. You can tell it's just a little bit different than, say that, which doesn't necessarily have all those little panels. So you would assume that this is heat shielded in some way. Otherwise, you'd be running around with like this on the bottom of your of your craft, which would look kind of ridiculous. There's other little things here, like there's this new air intake, right? But with the new air intake, there is a engine pre-cooler. Now, an engine precooler is something that actually exists. It takes the air that you're intaking and it cools that air down. So when it goes into your engine, your jet engine, not your rocket, your jet engine, it's just more efficient at higher speeds and at a slightly higher altitude. So it just turns, space planes into more of a thing that you can do with the engine precooler. And I like that they added something that is actually a functional part in real life. There's a lot of just like little aerodynamic things. Like there's these new nose cones that you can use for rockets. Like say, for example, you had a fuel tank like so attached, and this was your main rocket. It just kind of makes it more inline, looks a little bit better, right? And there's just a few new air intakes, such as this ram air intake and all that fun stuff, right? Stuff that you probably are interested in using, but there's so much of it that it will take like several hours for you to really get things to the point where you feel like, yeah, I've seen all the new parts and they feel good. One thing I did want to point out before we move on to testing the aerodynamics of aircraft is this new avionics hub. It's an SAS module. Where did it go? There it is. It's kind of tiny, but let's be honest, it's an SAS module. That's what its function is. So it's more for like unpiloted aircraft and stuff like that, which is really cool. You can obviously just put it on probe cores for landers if you really wanted to. But I think that covers it for most of the new aerodynamic parts. I'm going to make a quick aircraft and we'll see just how they fly now. So this is the aircraft. It's kind of more jet-like. It's got its air intakes, but it's using the new landing gear that they've added, which is really cool. There's a larger version of it, right? So there's this big stuff. And then they have like this biplane gear, which I love. And the fact that you get it early on is pretty funny to me. I really, really appreciate this stuff. You could kind of see it there. It's stuff that you might see on a biplane or a prop plane. And then, they've got the one on the back that you would normally use for that prop plane as well. But before I move on, I did just quickly need to mention, because I didn't before in the vehicle assembly bay, that there is a new solid fuel booster that you start with. The reason they've added this little tiny thing, like in comparison to the one that you used to start with, is because they needed to rebalance how this worked, because with the new aerodynamics, this would get you way too far into the atmosphere, and they didn't want that, so they wanted to give you a smaller one called the Flea, which is quite cool. Now, hopefully Bill and Jebediah don't die in the process of learning this, but this will end up going very, very fast. I gotta point that out, so I'm gonna pull up back my throttle already, because it's just gonna like flip out. There's a lot there's a lot of torque now, right? So before you could kind of get away with having craft that weren't necessarily aerodynamically balanced, but I purposefully put the weight and lift ratio further to the back just to show you that, yeah, this is going to be a bit more difficult. However, while it may be a little bit more difficult as far as, building craft is concerned, it makes it a lot easier to fly, because they're not just going to like freak out and start like spinning around on you anymore, which I really like. In fact, this in particular, I like how one of my air brakes is catching air the wrong direction. In particular, and once again, I did this on purpose. Let's see if I can do it again without crashing. So you can stall the wings out like that, and the engines, of course. But it gives you, this is obviously hard to fly, right? I made this purposefully hard to fly to show you that you could do maneuvers that you couldn't necessarily do before, because the thing would just freak out. Which I like the fact that it's actually there now. And if you hit B for brakes, it will hit your air brakes, which is really cool. And then before, with aircraft, you could typically only get, on average, to like 200 meters a second at this low in atmosphere, maybe 300. Now I'm just gonna go. I'm just gonna let this thing do its thing. I'm not even gonna touch the controls here, and you'll notice that it'll not only speed up, but it will heat up. It will start gaining heat on itself because of the the atmospheric pressure against the, the wings in the cockpit. It's really cool seeing all this new, effects as well. Now, if I had more power on this thing, and less weight in particular, I would be able to get up, well beyond Mach 2 and stuff like that. So I've seen aircraft hilariously catch fire that people are making with the new aerodynamic system. But this one in particular was just to show you that things work a lot better than they used to, and the fact that you can actually pull weird aerodynamic maneuvers that you couldn't before, such as these really cool stalls that you may or may not see in things like Top Gear. I like it a lot, especially with multiplayer coming. Just imagine the kind of dogfights you can have with being able to totally stall out your aircraft while flipping it around. Boom. I love doing that. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun to fly. Now, obviously, you can make really, really, really freaking stable aircraft as well. This is just an example of more of a fun one.